Is Bridgerton historically accurate? It's the hit Netflix show set in Regency-era Britain, and in this episode of History Calling, I'm going to tell you 10 things Bridgerton gets right and 10 things it gets wrong about life in England in the 1810s. This video will contain spoilers for the first 3 seasons, so consider yourselves warned. Let's start with one of Bridgerton's most obvious but beautiful inaccuracies, the costumes. Season 1 is set in 1813, then 1814 for Season 2 and 1815 for Season 3. While the silhouette of the ladies' costumes is broadly correct in that most of them are wearing empire-waisted dresses with full-length, slightly billowy skirts, sometimes with short sleeves, the colour palettes, fabrics and detailing are often entirely anachronistic. One of the costume designers stated in an interview to promote Season 3, which I've linked below for you, that this is not a history lesson. This is a show about beauty, glamour. And so we see things like 3D printed fabrics, glitter, cloaks closed over with magnets so that they can be whipped off to dramatic effect, and Manolo Blahnik shoes. The underwear is often wrong too. Back in Season 1, we saw some of the ladies being tightened into full corsets, which made no sense given that the dresses have the high empire cut that I mentioned a moment ago, and the type of corsets you see in those scenes were completely wrong for the outerwear that was going on top of them. Corsets were also not the implements of torture that TV shows and movies so often make them out to be, but I'll not get into that topic here. The men's costumes follow a similar trend to the ladies', meaning broadly accurate silhouettes, but inaccurate fabrics and patterns. For example, there is denim for Colin Bridgerton's breeches and a modern belt in Season 3, because as the costume designers explained, he was inspired by American cowboys. The designers also admitted to updating the gentleman's underwear so that while it would have period details, it would be more figure-hugging and be better eye candy for the viewer. I thought it was interesting that they could still say that about the male actors, by the way. I don't think you'd get costume designers nowadays admitting to putting actresses in tighter, skimpier underwear so they'd be better eye candy. I wonder if comments like that about the men might go out of fashion in another few years. The designer for Season 2 also admitted that the character of Anthony Bridgerton was deliberately put in a lighter weight shirt for a scene when he falls in a lake so that it would be extra see-through once wet. Again, not sure you'd admit to doing that to a woman now. Even the silhouettes are not always correct. Penelope Featherington's Season 1 and 2 dresses were rather badly fitted on her, which I think was on purpose because she's not meant to be very fashionable at that point, but the empire waist hit her across the middle of the bust instead of underneath it. This was changed after her Season 3 glow-up and looks far better. This was nothing to the silhouettes which continue to be seen on the characters of Queen Charlotte and Lady Featherington though. Both are wearing dresses that are wildly out of fashion. Queen Charlotte looks like she's teleported in from the 1750s, and Lady Featherington would be more, though not entirely, at home in the TV show The Gilded Age, set about 80 years later. While some have tried to argue that the Queen is just hanging on to the fashions of her youth, in reality, the actual Charlotte wore the silhouettes common to the 1810s, as seen in this portrait of the real woman. Of course, this is done for storytelling purposes, as it sets the Queen apart and makes her take up more space in the room, indicating her greater social status and importance in this world. But it's still inaccurate. For a real dress from this period, see this image of one I stumbled across in the V&A Museum, or this dress worn by Princess Charlotte of Wales to her wedding in 1816, though if you watch my video on this item, you can hear about how it has been altered over the years so that it could be reused. Finally, the other big deviation from historical accuracy in the costumes is the lack of bonnets. You barely see a lady's hat in this show, bar Lady Danbury's top hat, and when you do, it looks nothing like the much more accurate bonnets that can be seen in this contemporary fashion plate. This would seem to be to allow the actresses' elaborate hairdos to be better displayed, But in reality, one would not go out during the daytime without one's hair covered up. See 1995's Pride and Prejudice for a better take on daytime clothing during this period. Now for something the show gets right, and that's the presence of Queen Charlotte and occasionally King George III. As you'll know if you watched my video all about the real Charlotte of Mecklenburg-Strelitz, she was indeed married to George during this period, and just as we see in the show on occasion, George did indeed suffer from severe mental health issues, which left him unable to rule by this point in his life. This brings us to our next inaccuracy, which is the portrayal of Queen Charlotte and her position in the British court. I'm not interested in getting into a debate about her skin colour, except to say that I've looked at the so-called evidence that she was biracial, and it's coswallop, made up by a pseudo-historian back in the 90s who offered little to no support for his claims and could never get them published anywhere reputable, only as a very short, virtually unreferenced blog entry for PBS. I bet you though, despite me only mentioning this for 30 seconds in this video, the comments will be more about this topic than anything else, because that's what happened when I did my biography video on her. Anyway, I'm actually more interested in her personality and social activities, and how these differed from the Charlotte in the show. The real Charlotte was something of an introvert, with none of the spark that we see in her reimagining in Bridgerton. While perfectly pleasant and inoffensive, she was not known for her scintillating conversation and wit, and was especially quiet with people she didn't know well. Her daughters were utterly desperate to get married and get away from court life with their mother because it was so incredibly dull. She also wasn't in charge of the court in the way that you see in the show. The reason this period is called the Regency is because her eldest son, the future George IV, was acting as Prince Regent at the time. He has so far been all but eliminated from Bridgerton to allow his mother to take centre stage, but in reality she was more of a side figure at this point. The Bridgerton character, I'm afraid, really has little in common with the real woman beyond her name and rank. Next, we have the social season, and this is accurate even if Charlotte presiding over it in the way we see in Bridgerton isn't. This was a period of the year when the aristocracy descended on London for a series of balls, plays, and other social events to basically hang out with each other. It roughly mirrored parliamentary sittings for some of its existence, meaning spring and early summer, before everyone went back to their country estates for the winter. A similar social season used to occur in Dublin too, by the way, when Ireland had its own parliament. But the Act of Union in 1801, which eradicated that parliament, pretty much spelt the end of that, as Irish MPs were now off to London, sitting in Westminster instead. The season certainly wasn't the only way a young woman could secure a husband, and vice versa, but it was one useful method of meeting and mingling with the opposite sex, and it did help along plenty of marriages. Back to appearances now for our next inaccuracy, and that's Bridgerton's hair and makeup, which is glaringly 21st century. Women did not go out with their hair down or half down in the way that we constantly see in Bridgerton, and they certainly didn't have shoulder-length hair like Eloise or perfect side-swept beach waves like Penelope after her glow-up. Again though, this is deliberately anachronistic, and the team behind the show have said that Penelope's looser waves in season 3 were inspired by 20th century stars like Rita Hayworth, Marilyn Monroe, and even Jessica Rabbit, not by hairstyles from the 1810s. As for the makeup, I can practically see the Charlotte Tilbury highlighter on Francesca's cheeks, or whatever brand they used, and the lipsticks and occasional flashes of what looked like acrylic nails were actually so wrong for what is supposed to be a period piece that I found them distracting. Now, I know that TV shows don't generally want to show actors with acne or redness or any other supposed imperfections, but for the record, while makeup existed in the 1800s, there wasn't the range or quality that we have now, nor were there good skincare products that could keep everyone looking as fresh as a daisy. People had spots, they had rosacea, they had no sunscreen, so they could expect to age faster. This is another reason bonnets were so important, to keep the sun off one's unprotected face. and they had wonky, stained teeth because they lacked what we would consider good dental hygiene and orthodontic care. They did not have Hollywood smiles, glamour makeup, all-round perfect complexions, and the ability to look at least 10 years younger than their real age, as though they're all being seen through an Instagram filter. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this content and would like to get more from me, please remember to give this video a like and subscribe to the channel with the notification bell switched on so that YouTube knows you approve and will keep you up to date with all my content releases. I also have a Patreon page where I share bonus material, including early access to ad-free videos, mini podcasts, blog posts, and more. Finally, you can check out my Amazon storefront, where I've collected together lists of history-themed books, TV shows, movies, and gift ideas, which I think you'll like. Both are linked below for you, as is my Instagram account. Thank you too to those of you who support the channel using the thanks button underneath videos, as your generosity is very kind, always appreciated, and as with my patrons, it helps me to keep doing what I'm doing. The next item on my list is both an accuracy and an inaccuracy because Bridgerton has not been consistent in how it has dealt with it, and that is the topic of chaperoning. In season 1, we see that Daphne Bridgerton needs to be chaperoned whenever she's expected to be in the company of men outside the family in order to protect her reputation, and one late night meeting in the garden with the Duke of Hastings is enough to imperil her good name. This is true. Chaperoning was indeed a thing, more for events than for everyday life. I'm not saying women couldn't go for an afternoon walk without a brother there to watch them. And it's not realistic how often we see it being tossed by the wayside by Bridgerton to suit the storyline. This was at its most egregious, I thought, in season 3, when Colin Bridgerton hops into Penelope's carriage because this young girl, barely in her early 20s, has been allowed to wander off by her mother and call the carriage by herself, and proceeds to ride home with her with no one to watch over them. What happens? Well, just like the garden tryst back in season 1, shenanigans happen, that's what, and Penelope is darn lucky he offers to marry her. If Colin was a cad who refused to wed her, but went off and told all his mates how easy it was to get up her skirts, she'd be utterly ruined. She also needs to worry about what the carriage drivers are going to tell her mother regarding what happened, because this could also lead to serious trouble for her. That brings us to our next accuracy, which is the double standard around shenanigans, depending on whether one was male or female. This is shown pretty accurately by Bridgerton. Both genders are well aware that ladies of the upper orders are expected to be as pure as the driven snow, while the men can hang out in brothels with the lower class women whose reputations they don't give a toss about. Where the inaccuracy slips in is that we don't see that the likes of Anthony and Colin Bridgerton and their cronies would probably all have raging cases of gonorrhea and or syphilis because of their time spent in brothels, which they would then likely give to their unoffending wives. Nor do we see all the illegitimate children these desperate prostitutes would have and the true danger and degradation of their lives. Instead, they are generally depicted by Bridgerton as beautiful, fun-loving young ladies, girl-bossing their way through life with nice clothes when they're wearing any and no unwanted pregnancies. If you want a better idea of what life was actually like for the average prostitute with no other means of income, think of the women Jack the Ripper murdered. Those were some real London prostitutes in the 19th century, and life was no picnic for them. While those women were all too familiar with the realities of life, though, something Bridgerton gets correct is the idea that ladies of the upper classes who were unmarried could be pretty clueless about the birds and the bees. We see this in season 1 when Eloise and Penelope are flummoxed as to how Marina could be pregnant without being married, and Daphne doesn't realise that her husband is preventing her from conceiving. While it may seem laughable to us, it's not that crazy. One famous example of a woman in her mid-20s betraying her lack of worldly knowledge comes from Anne of Cleves, fourth wife of Henry VIII. In 1540, she admitted that the extent of Henry's physical affection to her was a kiss, and innocently asked if that was not enough to get pregnant. Some women knew what was meant to happen, of course, but not everyone. Another area in which the show sometimes plays with reality has to do with how aristocratic titles descend. These usually go from one man to the next, usually father to son, but not always, and certainly not always in Bridgerton land. This is most obvious in season 3 when Will and Alice's son suddenly inherits the title Baron Kent, plus a house and tons of money from his mother's great aunt, Lady Kent. This is an extremely unlikely scenario. First of all, Lady Kent would have needed to hold the title in her own right in order for it to only pass on after her death rather than her husband's, which was a very rare occurrence. Second, it would have to be inheritable. This was even more unusual for a woman ennobled in her own right, as the title was usually hers for her life only, though Anne Boleyn's Marchioness of Pembroke title was granted in 1532 in such a way that she could have passed it on to her son if she had had one, even if he was illegitimate. Third, the idea that it could pass through the female line to a great-great-nephew isn't something I've ever heard of. I'm reluctant to say that it's absolutely impossible because, as with Anne's Pembroke title, you could have a special remainder that would allow it to descend in an unusual way, but this was the exception, not the rule, and it isn't mentioned in the show. It's far more likely that the Kent title simply would have become extinct. If anyone cares, the actual Kent title at this time was a dukedom, not a barony, and in the 1810s it was held by Prince Edward, brother of George III and future father of Queen Victoria. Then we have the Featherington title. At the end of season 2, Lady Featherington says she's had a document forged which will allow the title to pass from its current holder, Jack, to the son of one of her daughters. This idea is then picked up again in season 3 when she tells her married daughters to get going on producing a son. I've never heard of anything remotely like this. To have the title descend in such a way, a special remainder would either need to have been written into the original patent granting it, or if there was no patent, because sometimes baronies were granted by something called a writ of summons, then after the current holder of the title dies, if he has no sons, it would go to his sole daughter, or else fall into abeyance if he had multiple daughters. Those multiple daughters would then basically have to hash it out as to who was going to get the title, then petition the crown to get the abeyance lifted. It's fairly complicated. What you cannot do is have a man sign off on a document saying that if he dies, whether he has children or not, the title is going to go sideways to the son of one of his distant female relations. It's also ridiculous to say it'll go to whichever of Lady Featherington's grandsons is born first. What if her younger daughter has a boy first, then her older daughter has one? The child of the older daughter should take precedence, right? What if the younger daughter has 2 boys? The first is known as Lord Featherington, but then he dies. Does the title go to his younger brother or to his cousin, the son of his mother's older sister? Bridgerton has completely dismantled the entire system of male primogeniture here, and it makes no sense at all. This isn't how aristocratic titles work because it would create such a mess of a situation. Let's switch back to accuracies. The need for a woman to marry is one of the main ideas driving the plot of Bridgerton forwards, and the desire to secure a good husband was indeed a primary objective for most women of this time, for there were very few options available for ladies to earn their own money. Funnily enough, this is one area where women of the lower orders might have been better off, as they could potentially have their own businesses or work as governesses, singers or actresses, even if those professions were sometimes looked down upon. Jane Austen was of genteel birth and earned some money as a writer, for instance, but it was actually a pretty pitiful amount and she never ran her own household. The daughters of the uber-rich sometimes had another option, which was that the money set aside for their marriage portions might be made available to them upon turning 21, say, and they could live off the interest from that. This didn't always provide a great income, though. If you're the daughter of a duke, you're likely used to a certain standard of living, and they would still often end up staying with other relatives. Marriage was the only sure way to be able to leave the nest and have your own household with your husband. On the subject of marriage and children, let's talk about education. Where is the Bridgerton girls' governess, and why is the youngest boy, Gregory, not at a boarding school like Eton or Harrow? Yes, he could be being home educated, but then where are his tutors? In Pride and Prejudice, Lady Catherine de Bourgh is understandably horrified that the Bennet sisters never had a governess, and this surprise would be all the greater for a wealthier, titled, London-based family. Who is teaching the Bridgerton kids all their accomplishments? Come to think of it, have we seen any governess or tutor in the entire show? I didn't rewatch all of it before creating this video, but I can't think of any off the top of my head. The only part of a boy's education which I can think of which has been accurately depicted is the grand tour of Europe which Colin has just returned from at the start of season 3. This was an extremely common thing for a young, wealthy man to do after he finished school, his home education and/or university in the 18th and 19th centuries. He would take anywhere from a few months to a year or more to travel around mainland Europe, seeing the sights and improving his language skills before coming home to settle down and really begin adulting, perhaps by going into Parliament and, of course, getting married. As for girls, something Bridgerton does get right, even though it doesn't show how on earth it happened, is the kind of curriculum that young ladies would follow in their own education. Subjects like reading, singing, playing an instrument, needlework, and foreign languages were all de rigueur, as was a solid grounding in religion and, if your mother was doing her job well, the knowledge of how to run a great household, which we see Daphne allude to back in season 1 after her marriage. Daphne made a very good marriage, of course. The daughter of a viscount getting a duke for a husband is a pretty good step up. But earlier in that season, we saw Queen Charlotte trying to matchmake the young Miss Bridgerton, whose actual title would be the Honourable Daphne Bridgerton, with her nephew, a foreign prince. This is not realistic. There is no way the Queen would want her nephew to marry someone so far beneath him socially, and nor would a prince countenance something like that either. Royals almost always married other royals in this period, no matter how pretty the Viscount Bridgerton's sister might be. That's what made Henry VIII so strange back in the 16th century, when he kept marrying his subjects, and there was horror when the future James II married the daughter of an earl in the 1660s, who he'd already gotten pregnant, by the way. His second wife was an Italian princess. Even Prince Albert was considered a bit low for Queen Victoria, and he was a prince in his own right. Something a lot more accurate is the existence of Lady Whistledown's gossip paper. Now, of course, Whistledown herself is a fictional construct. Spoiler alert, she's Penelope Featherington. But there were gossip columns and pamphlets in existence in the 18th and 19th centuries, just as we have celebrity magazines today. The main difference being that they wouldn't have published people's full names, instead calling them things like the Duchess of D instead of the Duchess of Devonshire, and other very easily broken pseudonyms. The main thing I don't find believable about the Lady Whistledown publication is actually the idea that Penelope could really get away with her side hustle. If she was an independent woman, then maybe, but this is meant to be a young woman living at home, surrounded by the nosiest mother and sisters of all time, and a household full of servants. The idea that she's sneaking out to hand over her manuscripts every week, or that she has the time to write this up without anyone noticing, is ludicrous. Still, it's fun to watch and listen to. The next inaccuracy won't take long to discuss at all. It's the soundtrack, including music actually being played within the scenes themselves for the characters to listen and dance to. Bridgerton uses a very modern soundtrack, with orchestral versions of songs by the likes of Taylor Swift, Madonna, and Harry Styles. This is all deliberate, of course, to help with the mix of historical and modern that the show is going for, but more accurate music would include the likes of Beethoven and Mozart. My final accuracy also blends in with my final inaccuracy, and that is to do with the colourblind casting. The show presents a completely multiracial world, where the British aristocracy, and indeed the population in general, are made up of people of all ethnicities, and there is no racism present. There is a shard of authenticity here in that Britain did indeed have non-white people living in it in the early 19th century. However, unfortunately, Bridgerton's view of a perfectly blended ethnic mix where no one is mistreated on the basis of their skin colour is a dream that has still not been realised today, much less 200 years ago. This really is an alternate reality, for in actuality, with only a tiny number of exceptions, most of the comparatively small number of people living in the UK at this time who weren't white were to be found in subservient positions. You'll most often see them in portraits of their wealthy employers/owners, because of course slavery was still a problem and some truly were slaves, and often we know little to nothing about them. Bridgerton's much kinder alternative history has both advantages and disadvantages for the viewer. On the one hand, it reminds me, of all things, of Star Trek. Those stories were set in a future where humans have mostly stopped squabbling amongst themselves for power and money, and things like poverty have been eliminated. Obviously we're not there yet, but it's good to dream and have something positive to strive for. In the same way, it's nice to see a racism-free world through the prism of Bridgerton, and to have that idea to work towards. The downside is that it means the show really can't engage with the reality of life for people of colour in this era, or comment on Britain's involvement with the slave trade or colonial history. Nor can it acknowledge that a great deal of the beautiful life its characters are living would only have been made possible, directly or indirectly, by the blood, sweat, tears, and lives of slaves. There's also the issue that some people who just take what they see on TV as gospel will actually believe what they're seeing. I know the very idea of thinking British society wasn't riddled with slavery and racism 200 years ago will seem ludicrous to most of you, but honestly, I get people all the time in the comments under my videos spewing back the crazy storylines of TV shows and movies at me as though it's real history. I recently had someone tell me to read the work of Philippa Gregory, a writer of historical fiction, in order to better understand the life of Queen Elizabeth of York and her cousin Edward, Earl of Warwick. A lot of people do buy this type of stuff, hook, line, and sinker. So that's my list of some of Bridgerton's most notable accuracies and inaccuracies. I hope you've enjoyed it and that it's given you a deeper understanding of Regency era history. Let me know below if there's anything I missed, I'm certain there is, but I just didn't have time to include more here, or what your opinion of the show is. For your next video, might I suggest my episode on the life of the real Queen Charlotte, my study of the wedding dress of her granddaughter, Princess Charlotte, or the story of how the most famous Regency novel, Pride and Prejudice, came to be. Whatever you choose, please enjoy, and until next time, keep learning.